Welcome to the 36th lecture in this lecture series introducing international investment law. In the last two lectures, we discussed about expropriation and the types of expropriation being direct and indirect expropriation. In this lecture, we discussed the ingredients of indirect expropriation. Three main criteria are used to determine whether there is expropriation under the BIT: detrimental effect, proportionality, and legitimate public interest. Detrimental effect is the first requirement for determining indirect expropriation. Here, the issue is whether the measure complained of produces any detrimental effect on the investment. This is often regarded as the major test or even the sole test in determining indirect expropriation and is therefore called as the sole effect doctrine. In Tibet versus Iran, the tribunal held the government's intention is less important than the effects of the measure on the owner of the assets, and the form of the measure of control or interference is less important than the reality of the impact. In Bilone versus Ghana, Antoine Bilone, who was a Syrian national, was a Ghanaian resident and had entered into an investment agreement with the government company of Ghana for a project. The investment agreement provided for arbitration under the aegis of the PCA. When the work was on the verge of completion, the work was ordered to be stopped. A portion of the project was demolished. Bilone was arrested for almost 2 weeks without charge and thereafter deported. Bilone was also not permitted to enter Ghana, which made Bilone, along with the company incorporated for the project, commence arbitration proceedings under the investment agreement. The arbitral tribunal considered the records in the submissions and held that a series of actions of the government had resulted in constructive expropriation, and the government's explanation thereof did not constitute due justification. Therefore, the tribunal held that Bilone was entitled to prompt, adequate, and effective compensation. In Metaclad versus Mexico, the issue involved was whether denial of permit by a local municipal authority for development and operation of Metaclad's corporation's hazardous waste landfill was violative of NAFTA, including the right against indirect expropriation. The project was initially approved by the federal government of Mexico, which had the exclusive authority as regards siting and permitting such landfills. The tribunal construed the denial of permit by the local authority, along with the representations and approvals of the federal government, constituted indirect expropriation, which Mexico was liable to compensate, but had failed to do so. On the issue as to whether intent was relevant, the tribunal stated the tribunal need not decide or consider the motivation or intent of the adoption of the ecological decree. Indeed, a finding of expropriation on the basis of the ecological decree is not essential to the tribunal's finding of a violation of NAFTA Article 1110. However, the tribunal considers that the implementation of the ecological decree would, in and of itself, constitute an act tantamount to expropriation. The second criteria is serious and irreversible damage. The investor has to establish that the government's measure constituted serious and irreversible damage to the investment. Minor restrictions and administrative inconveniences would not amount to indirect expropriation. The determination of serious and irreversible damage is a determination on a case-to-case basis. What matters is not the duration of damage, but the adverse effects produced by the measure. Criteria for adverse effect have been explained by an arbitral tribunal in Pope and Talbot Incorporated versus Canada. Whether the investor ceased to remain in control of the investment and directed the day-to-day operations of the investment, whether any officer or employee of the investment were detained by virtue of the regime, whether the host country supervised the work of the officers or employees of the investment, whether the host country took any of the proceeds of the company's revenue apart from taxation, whether the host country interfere with the management or shareholders' activities or prevent the investor from paying dividends to shareholders, interfere with the appointment of directors or management, and took any decision ousting the investor from full ownership or control of the investment. Unless these factors are considered and point out towards loss of control by the investor, there would not be any serious or irreversible damage caused. In short, there should have been a loss of control and enjoyment of the benefits of the investment. This is known as the substantial deprivation test. More on this in the next lecture. Bye bye and stay safe.